Hello students, and welcome to the next lesson in our AS level psychology course. Today we're going to be looking at the psychodynamic explanation of psychopathology. So what is the psychodynamic approach? This approach was developed by probably the most famous psychologist in all of the history of psychology, Freud, and it states that the unconscious forces control the mind, and this contains emotions which can then become conscious thoughts in the future. If these unconscious processes are maladaptive and they do become conscious, it's going to lead to abnormal behavior in the person. The unconscious mind consists of three main components, and we're going to have a look at them now. So, what are the three main components? The first component is the ID. Now, this is the part of the brain which is going to control the primary drives and impulses. Its only objective is to meet these drivers, so it pretty much sets out for the person to meet any drive and impulse which they may exhibit. For example, the drive to have to eat or the drive to reproduce. The ego is a reality principle which is going to balance the ID's wants with the rules of society. Now, of course, the ID is pretty much limited to what it can do because the ID wants to just do whatever it can to meet whatever impulse it's set out to really want. But the ego balances with what society sees as acceptable. For example, if the impulse of needing to procreate and reproduce is what is alarming the ID, the ego is then going to have to balance that and understand that society does not allow people to just run around trying to sleep with everyone in the street. So the ego is then going to tell the ID that this isn't possible, and if they need to procreate, they must do it in another way. The superego contains the understanding of society's rules. So for this reason, we kind of say that the ego is the middleman between the ID and the superego. The ego knows what the ID wants, but it also knows what the superego knows. So as a result, it's going to balance the two of them, and the superego knows all of the understanding of society's rules, which is going to limit the ID from pretty much meeting whatever it wants. Know that all of this is unconscious, and therefore because it's unconscious, we don't actually think about it knowingly. This all happens supposedly on a subconscious level, which we actually can't tell ourselves, but it is happening in our brains. So abnormal behavior occurs when these are not balanced. If the ID is superior to the superego and the ego can't balance the two of them, this may actually result in abnormal behavior. For example, the person who's just running around trying to sleep with everyone is going to be the example of someone who is exhibiting this abnormal behavior. Now we're going to look at the psychosexual theory. Freud stated that in our childhood we are going to experience certain events, and these are going to later impact our behavior in our later lives. Maladaptive memories are going to manifest themselves in our unconscious and then turn into abnormal behavior when we're older. The psychosexual theory consists of stages from childhood which are going to then impact our later life behavior. So this is what the psychosexual theory states. It consists of a number of stages as we're growing up, and these explain how we kind of act when we're older. The oral stage is a stage which we experience supposedly between 1 and 2 years. Here, the infant seeks oral gratification. So this means that they will have fixations on both smoking and drinking, and as a result, because they were seeking pleasure at an early age through the mouth, they're then going to want to meet this pleasure when they're older by perhaps putting things in their mouth such as cigarettes or alcohol. The anal stage happens between 1 and 3 years. Here, the child gains pleasure from toileting and toilet training. This would lead to the person's obsessions with order and controlling emotion when they're much older. The phallic stage states that genitals become more sensitive when the child is between 3 and 5 years. At this point, the child has unconscious sexual desires for the opposite parent and fears the parent of the same sex, which are going to then act as competition. The latency stage, which happens between 5 and 12 years, suppresses sexuality as sexuality becomes dormant, and the child concentrates on developing confidence and growing up. Then, from 12 years onwards, is the genital stage. Here, genitals become more erogenous, and the child becomes interested in the opposite sex. This affects their decision-making ability when they're older. Now, you've probably just read through all of this and thought this is complete rubbish, because all of this is, too highly theoretical, and it doesn't really make much sense. And pretty much today, every psychologist really agrees that this is quite outdated. It's a really, really old theory, and of course it doesn't make sense that or supposedly, that the anal stage is going to result in someone's obsession with order and their need for controlling emotion. There's not much scientific backing to it. So this is just a stage, and it isn't entirely needed for the psychology course, but it is something interesting which you could write in an essay when talking about the psychodynamic analysis of abnormal behavior, because these are the actual explanations of how abnormal behavior could supposedly occur if we are following Freud's theory. Now we're going to evaluate the psychodynamic approach, and as you could assume, there's going to be a lot of criticism for the kind of crazy ideas which were seen as kind of acceptable when they were actually brought out. The positive is that you could say that it identifies the role of the unconscious, which none of the other theories, that being of the biological theory, behavioral therapy, or cognitive theory of abnormality, really identifies. Also, psychoanalysis is proven to work to treat abnormalities. Now, this could just be a placebo happening in psychoanalysis, but you could say that because psychoanalysis, which is a therapy which helps with to treat abnormality based upon the psychodynamic approach, that you could say that technically perhaps some likeness of the psychodynamic approach actually works. Now, this is a big problem. It's not scientific, and it's all based on just guesses effectively. So as a result of this, due to the fact that it has no scientific backing whatsoever, it's hard to prove and say that this is an actual approach which we can use to define abnormality and explain it with. Also, it ignores the physical causes of abnormality, such as that of explained in the biological explanation of psychopathology, and states that this is all pretty much unconscious forces happening in the mind. And it also ignores conscious thought processes, like the cognitive therapy explains it is actually rational thinking and irrational thinking which is going to result in our own behaviour, but this completely ignores that and states that it's the unconscious forces which drive us to become abnormal. Here are some questions on psychopathology based on the psychodynamic approach. Have a go at answering these on another sheet of paper by pausing a video, and then hit play whenever you're ready to see the answers. Here are the answers. If you got all of these right, congratulations. I'd advise you to move on to the next video, which will be the final video in our AS level psychology course, which will be on psychoanalysis, a means of treating abnormality based on the psychodynamic approach. As always, visit the channel or revisealevel.co.uk if you need any more help for AS level psychology, and good luck in your exams. I'll see you next time.